Hello, this is Allister Whiteside from W&W Productions. This is the pilot video for our Pro Tools tutorial video series. Hopefully by the end of this series you'll be able to competently operate Pro Tools, and you'll also have a basic grasp of the different key commands that can be performed within Pro Tools to streamline your workflow and to make everyday operation much easier. This video series has been done in response to quite a lot of people I know who I've worked with who seem to shy away from Pro Tools. But there seems to be some stigma attached to it. Basically people are saying it's too hard to operate. This isn't the case for most people, but even if we help one or two people with this series, I'll count it as a success. So in this first video we'll be going into just basic operation, how to start a new session, and an explanation of the different options that are available, the different stuff such as sample rate and bit rate, just touching upon those so people have a better idea of what they actually are. And then we'll go into setting up the inputs and outputs for Pro Tools and the buses and stuff like that. So if you're on a Mac, you can hold Command and Spacebar, type in Pro Tools. When you hold Command and Spacebar, that will open your Spotlight search. Type in Pro Tools, hit enter, and it will open Pro Tools. Now, before you get to this window, which is the quick start window, it will load all your plugins. So I've skipped that because obviously you don't want to wait for the time it takes for me to load all my plugins. Now, in Pro Tools 10, which is what I'm using, you have a couple of different selections. You can have create session from template. So you can make your own templates in here. You can different stuff like guitar tracking. For example, you could have that as 4 tracks, and all the regions could be set up to route through your desk, from your guitar inputs. That's really useful if you're a studio and you don't want to have to set up your IOs every time. You can just have one template, all your hardware sends or your hardware returns, but we'll touch more on this in the future. For now, we'll mostly be focusing on create a blank session. You also have the options of opening a recent session and just open a session. So when you select create blank session, down here you have session parameters. Now, the audio file type, at the moment it's set at WAV for mine, so any audio I record into Pro Tools will be saved as a WAV file, and then you also have AIFF. The sample rate. First I'll explain what a sample is. Okay, now we're going to talk about sampling. Now, in the Pro Tools Quick Start menu, you'll see you have a couple of different selections for sample rate. You have 44.1 and 48 kilohertz. When you think for sample, obviously in analog, like an old record player, the audio is constant. It's a constant stream. There's no breaks. But when you go into the digital domain, the sample rate, 44.1 kilohertz, which is CD sample rate quality, is 44.1 thousand little pictures of the sound every second. So if I show you on here, you can see this is 44, this is probably 44.1. You can see it takes samples over time, and this is obviously the analog wave. The red line is the analog wave, which is constant. The samples are the little pictures of the sound, so obviously the more little pictures you have, the higher definition you can have. You can think of it almost like pixels, if that makes it easier. But if people want, we can go into future videos really looking at the physics behind audio. Some people might find that really interesting, some people might not want that. Now, the bit rate, the bit depth, is the amount of information that each sample will hold. In the computer world, bits are a unit of memory. Now you can see here, this is 44 kilohertz sample rate and 16-bit depth. So we can see we've got our little pictures of the sound, which are this axis. But you can see we only have 1 and then 2 squares there, which is the bits, the amount of information. But if we go to the 44 kilohertz 24-bit, we can see we have a lot more information per little snapshot of the sound. And then if you go up to 24-bit 96k, you can see it does faithfully replicate what the analog signal would look like. There's some purists that really just hate digital, but I feel that if you're an industry professional, you've got to try and find the trade-off. Some people can't afford to track to analog tape, because it just costs so much. So in the next part of the video, we'll be talking about the I/O setup for Pro Tools and just basic stuff you can do. So here we are, we've just created our new session and we've used a sample rate of 44.1K and a bit depth of 16. Now when you come to Pro Tools, I assume that most people want to record. Well, even if you don't want to record, you'll need to set up your I/Os. So first you want to go into Setup and then I/O. Now in here we have inputs. Because I'm using a 2-channel input interface, the Focusrite Sapphire 6 USB, we have a couple of options here. So I have 2 channels of input, obviously. I can have those as 2 mono channels, or I can configure them to create 1 stereo input. It can record from both of them at once. So these can all exist at the same time. So I'll show you if I do a new track, which can be done by holding down Shift, Command and N. That will bring up the new track. So if I create 1 mono audio track, and that track will be created, I can have the input as input 1 or input 2. This is using those as mono because it's not going to give me the option of using a stereo input to a mono track. And if I do Command Shift N again and select a stereo track, I now have the option of my stereo inputs. Now that will be using input 1 and 2 and it will record them both onto a stereo track. So hopefully that's the I/Os covered. Obviously if you have more inputs it'll be a lot more difficult. Now for outputs, on my one I have 4 outputs. I have a left and right for my monitor speakers, and then I have like a foldback for on the front, which is like a headphone output. That can be mapped to either be, everything can be sent out of those, or if we've got a vocalist who's, in a live situation and they just need to hear the vocals, we can set the, the foldback to be just for vocalists, and then we can send that from Pro Tools out of that input. Now these are the buses. Now sometimes if Pro Tools isn't working, if the I/Os aren't working correctly, it helps just to select one of the buses, hold Command and A and delete all the paths. And now if you go select this to all buses and then just click default, it will automatically regenerate all the buses in the correct manner. So if I'm opening a session that's using a different template and then I open up a blank session to record, my buses will be completely different and it won't work until I reset them. Now if you go to hardware, there you go, Sapphire 6. I mean, really with this, I can't give you all the guide on how to set up every single interface because everyone is different. But if I can just teach you how to troubleshoot it if it's not working, you can go back to Playback Engine. You can select the Playback Engine. I like 512 samples, 2 processors, CPU usage limit. You just want to make sure that everything looks somewhat like this and you should be good to go. And then if we go disk allocation, you don't need to know that. And this is pretty much all you need to know about setting up the I/Os. Mostly, I'd recommend that if it's not working, I'd look online for like your specific interface, because sometimes it can be that there's so many different variables. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. I know I've waffled quite a lot, but hopefully as I create more videos I'll get a lot better at it. I'm used to being on the other side of the glass. I'm not used to being on this side, actually producing something that people are going to use. But if there are any comments, any questions, any requests for future videos, feel free to leave them in the comments and we'll definitely get to them. In the next video I think I'll be talking about more the operational side of Pro Tools. It might be quite slow, but hopefully by the time this video is released there'll be a few more, so if people are more comfortable with the operation of Pro Tools, you can skip forward to the more interesting stuff. Thank you.